Frazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
I'm Karen Roberts. These are your latest headlines. The UK hasn't ruled out military involvement in the ongoing dispute with France over post-Brexit fishing rights. French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel that was detained for not having a licence. French prosecutors have summoned the boat's captain to appear in court next August. The Environment Secretary, George Eustace, told GB News Navy vessels will be used if needed.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But for now, we're trying to de-escalate this. But we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
A retired accountant who stabbed her husband 3 times and left him for dead has been jailed for life. Penelope Jackson killed her husband of 24 years at their home in Somerset in February this year. Jackson had denied murder but pleaded guilty to manslaughter, claiming she'd lost control after years of physical and emotional abuse. The Prime Minister has told China's president that world leaders must do more to tackle the climate crisis. The extensive conversation took place as Greta Thunberg joined a rally in London to protest against the use of fossil fuels. During talks with President Xi Jinping, Boris Johnson stressed that all countries must take concrete action to cut emissions and to speed up their transition to renewable energy. The Chinese president has confirmed that he'll attend COP26 in Glasgow via video link. The Queen has been advised to rest for at least the next 2 weeks. Her doctors say that she can undertake light, desk-based duties, but should not make any official visits. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Her Majesty will be unable to attend the Festival of Remembrance on the 13th of November, but hopes to take part in Remembrance Sunday. The Scottish Government is providing £41 million to help families with their winter bills. The cash will be made available for those on low incomes who are struggling to pay for energy. It'll also help those at risk of homelessness. £6 million from the pot will go to charities that work with families in need. Former One Direction singer Zayn Malik has entered a plea deal in the US after being charged with 4 counts of harassment. Court records show the singer was charged following a row at his home with Yolanda Hadid, the mother of his partner Gigi. He's been placed on probation for a year and must complete an anger management class as well as a domestic violence programme. The Prime Minister has lent his support to the Royal British Legion's centenary appeal, raising funds for veterans. Boris Johnson bought a poppy on the steps of 10 Downing Street before urging everyone to buy a remembrance symbol. Founded in 1921, the Poppy Appeal also raises funds for serving personnel and their families. You're right up to date. I'll be back in an hour.
Are we heading for a two-tier society? What I'm now going to call the jabbed and the jab-nots. Well, let's have a listen to New Zealand Premier Jacinda Ardern, who said this earlier on today.
So you basically see this is going to be like, well, it's almost like, you probably don't see it like this, the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so yep. People who have been vaccinated will want to know that they're around other vaccinated people. They want to know that they're in a safe environment. It is a way that we can give confidence to those who are going back into hospitality or events. And so that is something that I think we should offer to people who have been vaccinated, that confidence that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe and that they can come back out and start enjoying those things safely.
Well, isn't that extraordinary? There she is, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, confirming in response to a journalist's question that, yes, there will be two different classes of people in New Zealand society, the jabbed and the jab-nots. And what I thought was even more sinister was that she said that people who had been jabbed wouldn't want to mix and spend time with those that hadn't been jabbed. It's almost as if the unjabbed in New Zealand will become the modern-day lepers, but it doesn't stop, of course, with New Zealand. In Austria, the new Prime Minister is seriously considering locking down the unjabbed if case numbers get worse. So if you're jabbed, you can go about your business and go to work. If you're unjabbed, you will have to stay at home. And if you're caught leaving your home, you will be fined. Now, of course, in Scotland, they've gone some way towards this already with the introduction of a vaccine passport scheme. And last weekend was the first time it was fully used for the nighttime industry, and it's been described as an unmitigated disaster, with footfall down 40% to nighttime venues and lots of aggro on the doors. And overnight, we hear the Labour Party now coming out unequivocally, John Ashworth saying that we must back Plan B. And of course, Plan B includes vaccine passports. Well, very much on the same theme. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, now says he is leaning towards compulsory NHS jabs. So if you haven't had a jab, you don't have a job. Already, this has been put in place for the care industry. Now, I'm not talking just about the NHS in isolation. I'm talking about a much bigger and broader point. Yes, I know that Boris Johnson repeatedly has rejected vaccine passports, but then, of course, if we go back over the last couple of years, many things that he said he wouldn't do because he was essentially a libertarian, in the end, he did do. And I do think that when it comes to people's jobs, when it comes to people's social lives, when it comes to lockdowns, if there are any again in the future, that right across the Western world, we are moving towards this two-tier society, the jabbed and the jab-nots. I have to say, myself, I'm not, worried myself about the vaccine. I felt that my age, with my medical background, it made perfect sense to have the jab. So I'm not arguing it from a perspective that I don't think people should have the jab. What I am saying is we're going much too far. The power of the state insisting that you have this vaccine, and if you don't, you're about to become a second-class citizen. I have to say, I find the whole thing completely and utterly loathsome. I really do. Well, joining me to discuss all of this is Dr. Peter Carter, independent health consultant, former chief executive of the Royal College of Nursing and vice president of the Institute of Customer Service. Peter, good evening and welcome to GB News.
Good evening, Nigel.
When Javid says that he's leaning towards mandatory jabs for those that work within the NHS, and that's because there are 100,000 people working in the NHS that have not yet been jabbed. When he says he's leaning towards, what he really means is he is going to introduce this, isn't he?
Well, I think it's highly likely, and I'm not going to sit on the fence here. Whilst I have had a lot of misgivings about how the COVID issue has been handled over the last 18 months, on this issue, I am foursquare behind what he's saying. I do believe that people working in the NHS should have the vaccine. It will save lives, save their lives, prevent many people from becoming ill, but also they've got an ethical and a moral responsibility to their patients and to the public. And I feel that there should be compulsion. Now, what I'm hoping is that if the government could get its comms strategy right, more and more of that 100,000 will see the benefit of it. Look, 75% of the people who are currently under the age of 50 and are in critical care, the common denominator is that they've not been vaccinated. Something like 20% of pregnant women who are in intensive care units have not been vaccinated. This vaccine has been a game changer. It will save lives and it will stop people becoming ill. So I'm hoping that more and more people would see sense, and we don't have to go for compulsion, that people will voluntarily come forward. If not,
I mean, come on. They've had many months of being told that they ought to do this, they should do this. And frankly, it's not about comm strategy. This is now about bullying, isn't it? I mean, this has happened in the care sector, where they've now got it down to 30,000 people that haven't had the jab. But what about this point, Peter? A lot of people, some would argue too many people in the NHS, never ever meet a patient, never meet a member of the public. They're working in offices, they're working in administration. And the second thing I'd ask you is whether you've been double vaccinated or not doesn't stop you being a carrier of this virus, does it?
But that's the case with most vaccines. It's very rare that a vaccine will give 100% coverage to anyone. But I don't know what's gone on with the site. I do think it is about communication, actually, that people have had such mixed messages. Look, I was listening to Michelle on the previous program, and she was saying, no, you cannot do this. Look, if we had people in this country with Ebola, I can't see people saying, I'm sorry, I'm not going to have the vaccination against Ebola. It's my civil liberties. It's my human rights. Well, what about the human rights of people like us that have had it and want to get maximum protection?
Right. So the logic
what we know.
So then the logic of your argument doesn't extend to the NHS. It extends to the entirety of our society, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I mean,
right.
I think what we should be doing is a bit like in the 50s when there was polio and smallpox. The vast majority of the population saw the benefit of those inoculations, and there were huge queues. I mean, I was a young child at the time, and I remember being with my mum queuing up, and I suspect you were as well, Nigel, and we had it. And no one was thinking, look, there is no such thing as smallpox, or why would we want to be inoculated against it? What we have to accept is COVID is going to be with us for as long as anybody cares to look ahead. I think we're going to have to get used to, like with the flu vaccine, having an annual jab. And I do think health workers and people like MPs should lead by example. They should have the vaccination, and it will do a lot to ameliorate the spread. It will not prevent it entirely, and people that have got underlying health conditions are going to be actually on, but such a lot could be done if we could get blanket coverage.
But if 10 to 15% of the population say we will not take this jab on principle, you are happy with the creation of a two-tier society, because that is what it would be.
I don't want to see a two-tier society, and I was as concerned as you were when I heard Jacinta Ardern very casually saying, oh yeah, we're going to have a two-tier society. I don't want that. But what I do want is more and more people to get the message, and you need to invest more in going into workplaces, going into schools, explaining to people the benefits of this. But also, I mean, if you take the high incidence of young women who are pregnant, who tonight, as we're on this broadcast, they're in intensive care. And what they're saying, because I work in a number of hospitals, and nurses and doctors say that people are saying, my golly, I wish I hadn't listened to the anti-vaxxers. People need to know. And those statistics are not getting through. And there's a lot of what I might call psychobabble being talked about this, and it's costing lives.
Well, you say they're not getting through. I think, to be fair, the pro-vaccination side of the argument is pretty powerful. Alcohol featured quite strongly in the budget today because the price, the duty on some really strong drinks It's going to go up, so I suspect, for whiskey and gin drinkers it's not great. But beer is coming down by threepence a pint, and champagne is going to be cheaper, which I'm sure will please all of those Labour supporters in Islington tonight. Well, joining me is somebody who's going to be very happy with this budget. I think he's been celebrating, actually. I'm joined by Hugh Osmond, the founder of Punch Taverns. Hugh, good evening.
Good evening.
Now, pubs have had a terrible time through, lockdown, the pandemic. Is this what was needed?
Well, I'm obviously delighted that the price of a pint of beer is coming down. So that is fantastic news. And also the rates reduction for small operators is going to be brilliant for a lot of owner-operators of pubs and restaurants, hospitality. So that is genuinely good news, and we're all pleased about that, and you have to be pleased about anything good. On the other hand, what wasn't in the budget but announced prior, the tax on jobs, the national insurance increase, which will predominantly hit young people, young workers, the younger workforce to pay for the elderly, is, I think, the single worst and most regressive tax hike we've had for years. That's not been included in the budget, probably won't be talked about tomorrow. But a few p off a pint of beer will do nothing to address what is a straight tax on young people's jobs. And, that I think is a real disappointment that wasn't looked at again, because it's totally regressive and hits all the wrong people. You don't charge the young to pay for elderly care.
No, but I guess they felt they had to raise taxes in some way. And, a lot of people are going to think this is unfair, but it is not going to change, Hugh, in the short term. How is the pub sector overall?
Well, I think that trade has been, reassuringly, pleasantly strong since reopening for most people. And, that has been a very good thing. What we read about in the papers that, people are still afraid and people are still worried about the epidemic. That's not really apparent, down your local. And I guess it's the people who like to go out are going out, and perhaps the people who don't like going out are saying, oh, it's much better if we stay in, and they probably would have stayed in anyway. So by and large, we're seeing people out and about. I'm sure you are too. Pubs are busy, restaurants are busy. It's been really good. And actually, to be fair to Rishi, the VAT reduction was very helpful. Shame that politically that couldn't be applied to alcohol, and perhaps the beer duty reduction now is meant to address that. But pubs, have been pretty busy without these restrictions. On the other hand, there is a lot of inflation now around, and it is a direct result of lockdowns and the government measures taken there. There's huge problems in recruitment and also in the supply side. Nothing to do with Brexit in the main, simply just coming out of an economy being shut down for 18 months, remarkable that politicians thought, that could just run smoothly. You can't just shut a whole economy down and just think, oh, great, we'll open it up again. All the supply side will be fine. Everything will be fine. And when you've got DVLA, not processing 50, 60,000 HGV drivers, what did you think was going to happen? Yeah, funnily enough, there's shortages of everything and prices have to rise.
Finally, on a slightly lighter note, how much will champagne come down by?
Well, I'm not quite. I'm not exactly sure. You caught me on the hop there. I think that beer will be 3 or 4p only. I doubt. I'm afraid that most pubs and restaurants will be able to pass those price cuts on to customers, because the price of pretty much everything else is going up. The cost of inputs and wages are going to be up 4 or 5%. Food and other supplies to pubs are minimum up 4 or 5%. So I doubt, unfortunately, that customers will see much of the benefit. This will just be one small part of everybody's business where the input costs have gone down. And we'll all be very grateful of that and have a few pints on it. But I don't think it will necessarily end up at the bar, I'm afraid, because everything else costs are just going through the roof. Sorry about that, Nigel.
You had to spoil it, Hugh, didn't you? You really did have to.
I am pleased about the price of beer. I'll be pleased about that. And I'm more pleased at the end of the day than I was at the beginning. But it's a tough market out there. It's tough for wages. It's tough to buy stuff. It's, inflation is coming and we're really feeling it in hospitality.
Hugh Osmond, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Unbelievably, we have a group I'd not heard of before, animal rebellion protesters. Yes, it's not Extinction Rebellion, it's Animal Rebellion now. And they've climbed the outside of the Home Office and the DEFRA building, and their aims, as I understand it, are to stop us eating meat, because meat and dairy produce emits too many greenhouse gases for their liking. And the group described themselves as being anti-speciesist. Well, I haven't got the foggiest idea what that even means. So let's go to Nathan McGovern, who is a spokesman for Animal Rebellion. Nathan, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
What is anti-speciesist when it's at home, please?
So essentially, speciesism is a form of discrimination that privileges the human species above others in the animal kingdom and places us on a pedestal like other forms of oppression.
I see, I see. So you think that by taking direct action, causing a blooming nuisance, putting the police out, disrupting central London to a certain degree, you think somehow this helps your case to make us... And by the way, do you want us to go vegetarian or vegan?
OK, so just to correct you there, Nigel, we are an organisation that is focused on systematic change. We don't blame and shame individuals like you're insinuating there. We are purely focused on changing systems.
I didn't insinuate that you were doing that against individual people. What I said was you're making a damn nuisance of yourself. And what I'm asking you is your aim for us to be vegetarians or vegans?
So the aim is for a transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system. That is the terminology that we would use.
I see. So that means vegan, basically?
If that's the term that you would like to use, Nigel, yes, but we use the term just and sustainably plant-based.
So in your ideal world, Nathan, can I have milk in my tea?
If it's plant milk, yes.
Ah, OK, right. And can I eat fish? I mean, if I go out and catch a fish, can I eat that?
Well, we would say no, because we are an anti-speciesist organisation. But again, we're focused on systematic change. We're not focused on individuals.
You know, I tell you what, Nathan, there's one area where I might have some agreement with you. You know, it does actually worry me that we cut down large chunks of the Amazon to produce very low-quality beef, to be consumed in very low-quality burgers. I do actually question whether that makes sense. But human beings have been eating meat for a very, very long time. There is significant evidence that proteins from fish and meat are not necessarily easily replaced by a plant-based diet without taking vitamin supplements of various kinds, and that actually meat, fish, dairy is part of a healthy, natural, balanced diet. And I think most people in the medical profession would agree with that. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
I would disagree with you there. I'd like to know what sources you're citing, as there is an emerging body of evidence that does show that a plant-based diet is healthy for all stages of life, and in some cases is much healthier than a diet that does include animal products.
Pretty boring, though, isn't it?
How do you mean? I mean, I don't think we would classify it as securing the planet for humans, for animals, and for the environment as boring.
Well, I would say the diet sounds very boring. And is at the heart of this, your concerns that we're all going to die very shortly through climate change?
Well, essentially, that is what Animal Rebellion is. We are bringing attention to the fact that animal agriculture contributes roughly a quarter of all global greenhouse gases, is the leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon, and we cannot have the climate crisis and climate breakdown discussion without mentioning animal agriculture.
But you see, whilst I'm all for minority groups having opinions, and that's fine, I'm not for them attempting to impose them upon everybody else. Reasoned argument is fine, and I'm giving you a chance to make your case, and that's right and proper that you should be able to do that. But let's be frank about it, shall we? 2% of the country is vegan, 5% of the country is vegetarian. You are very much a minority cult, and whilst you're fully entitled to make your arguments and give your views. You're not entitled to disrupt public buildings in London and God knows what else you've got planned for the future. You're a damn nuisance and you don't help your cause one little bit by behaving in this way.
Well, you can have that opinion.
I do.
And
most people do.
Does show,
Nathan, most people do.
Swathes of evidence does show we are experiencing a rising trend of a transition to plant-based proteins and plant-based alternatives. In fact, a think tank, Rethink X, does predict that even with government subsidisation, animal agriculture will not be profitable by 2035, and that is not a long time away. We need to transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system with the assistance of government subsidy.
And you think, governments, I see, so the taxpayer's going to fund all of this, yeah?
Well, at the moment, the taxpayer is funding £1.5 billion, and that's a conservative estimate of animal agriculture in the UK every year. That £1.5 billion would be much better used and invested in a just and sustainable plant-based food system that will secure the future for humans, animals and the planet.
Nathan, I don't doubt your sincerity. I don't doubt you do actually believe in this. I think it's a little bit on the edge. I think it's very much a minority sport. But I'll promise you one thing. If you go round disrupting public buildings, you will lose support for your cause and not gain it. But I thank you for coming on the programme.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
Conservative Member of Parliament for Shipley, Philip Davies. Philip, welcome to
Cheers.
the GB News pub. Very nice
Cheers, you too.
to see you. So you were there today in a packed House of Commons?
I wasn't actually in the House of Commons.
Weren't you?
I was watching it on the TV in my office. It's much more civilised than.
Right. Are there enough seats in that place?
No, there aren't. I mean, there's 400 seats. I think there's 650 MPs. So
right, yeah,
So it's better watching it in the office.
What did you think of it?
Look, he's got a difficult task. He hasn't really got much room to play with. It's the lockdown's been terrible for lots of reasons, but obviously for the nation's finances. I don't really think any self-respecting Conservative can be happy with a budget that's put up taxes so much.
Let's face it, on most issues now, your cabinet are more like Labour were a few years ago than they are Conservatives.
Well, they might be a bit more like Labour were a few years ago, but they're certainly not much like Labour are today.
What are Labour like today?
Well, I mean, but I think there's no doubt the centre of gravity of British politics has moved to the left over the last 20 years or so on most issues.
No, it really has. It really, really has. Now, you're a serial rebel. You vote against the government on virtually everything.
It's not quite true, but anyway.
Well, I
keep
might
going.
have a look at this. Quite a long list, you know. So clearly not aiming for ministerial office, because that's not going to happen. And of course, you're married to Esther McVeigh, who knows what she believes in.
Don't I know it?
Sure you do. What are you in politics for? Because you're in Parliament, you represent your constituency, and I get that bit, and that's an honour to do it. There's no question about that. But you're in a party that you're increasingly at odds with on some very, very major issues. What is Philip Davies trying, apart from having a jolly good time and upsetting everybody, what are you trying to do?
Well, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, I always say the one thing that me and Conservative Prime Ministers agree about is that I should never be promoted. And I don't want to be promoted. I said in my maiden speech...
It's not going to happen.
I said in my maiden speech I would never accept a promotion if I was ever offered one. Look, what I like doing in Parliament particularly, apart from representing the fantastic people of the Shipley constituency, is I like speaking up and saying things that I think lots of people in the country think, but hardly anybody in Parliament will ever say. You know, if I feel I'm saying something and nobody else in there would have said that, then I feel that my position in Parliament is worthwhile. And so that's really what I like doing.
On global warming, firstly, there's actually more scepticism about the science, I think, than people realise. A lot of people say, well, hang on, you know, what about volcanoes? What about sunspot activity? I mean, there's nobody saying, by the way, that 7.5 billion people on this planet's a good thing, in the sense that, you know, it must be doing something. So the scepticism around the science, I wouldn't say it's huge scepticism, because certainly anybody under the age of 35 has been indoctrinated, you know, without any sense of balance, and the same on the BBC and elsewhere. But where there's real scepticism is on wind energy. Mm-hmm. Where there's increasing anger is people realising over these last 10 or 15 years the amount of surcharge they've paid on their bills to pay to people like David Cameron's father-in-law, who owns land in North Lincolnshire and has got wind turbines on them, to pay big offshore wind companies. So there's a real, I guess the higher bills go, the more they say, hang on, we've been ripped off for years on this. And now they're telling me that I've got to, in my Edwardian semi, you know, install a heat pump, and it's probably going to cost 25 grand to get all the different building works done. And when the temperature drops below 5 degrees, it isn't going to work anyway. So I sense on this issue something's going on. Mm-hmm. And I know you spoke out about COP26 in the last couple of days. Just tell us what you said.
Well, look, my view is I'm not even arguing about the science, and there's people better qualified than me to talk about what's happening. And you know, is the climate changing? Well, of course the climate's changing. The climate's always changed, and it always will do. So people say, you know, the climate deniers and all this stuff. Absolutely not. I'm perfectly happy to accept the climate is changing, and that those changes will cause some difficulties in different places around the world. I'm fully accepting of that. My point is that I even find saying it quite strange because it's so ludicrous that the political class have decided that the solution to this problem is that we're all going to get together around the world and we're collectively going to change the world's climate. Now, that to me is as ridiculous as it sounds saying it.
Oh, come on, Philip. You know that if Boris gets the right agreement in Glasgow over the next couple of weeks, temperature rises will be kept to exactly 1.5 degrees centigrade. I mean, it must be right, mustn't it?
Yeah,
I know, it's nonsense.
It's unbelievable. And so my point is that we're literally on the verge of committing to spend £1.4 trillion in this country that we don't have, by the way, whilst also at the same time piling on costs onto consumers who are struggling already with the cost of living. And we're going to do all that in order to get our carbon emissions down from where they are currently, which is less than 1% of global carbon emissions, to net zero. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, China, India, emerging economies in Africa, they're increasing carbon emissions each year. Their increase is going to be more than our total. And so we're going to be pursuing a policy that we can't afford, which is absolutely futile.
Yeah.
Because of the actions of the other countries around the world. And people say, well, of course, if we do this, other countries will follow suit.
No, other countries will take advantage of it.
Well,
because we're handing them
absolutely.
we're handing them heavy manufacturing, we're handing them heavy engineering, we're handing China massive strategic advantage. I mean, I'm completely with you on this. But when you call your leader, your party leader and Prime Minister, when you say that his environmental push is utterly futile, virtue signalling, does he ever speak to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he?
Yeah.
What does he say?
Well,
It is before the watershed, so be careful.
Look, I get on very well with Boris. He's got lots of qualities. On this issue, he feels very strongly about it. I don't doubt his sincerity about the issue, but we just fundamentally disagree about the common sense of it. That's basically it. He thinks that this is really important. And to be honest, you know, the majority of people in Parliament agree with that. I'm in a very, very small minority of MPs who think it's absolutely crazy to go down this route. And, you know, the point I keep making is that, you know, when people say, well, you know, if we do this, other countries will follow suit. This is the same argument that CND used in the 1980s about unilateral nuclear disarmament. If we do it, everyone else will follow suit. It was absolute madness then. And this environmental version of it is madness now. And these countries are not following us. They're laughing at us, frankly. And, you know, China has been building a coal-fired power station every week. They've committed to build...
I think more than that, actually.
Well, they're committed to building 100 new airports over the next decade. And we're still in this view that if we just get ourselves to net zero and bankrupt ourselves in the process, we'll have sorted out the world's climate.
But how do we get change, Philip? Because we have a first-past-the-post system, which means in England, which is 86% of the population, it's Labour or Conservative. There's the odd scattering of Liberal, and there's no way of changing that. It can't be broken. We don't have referendums very often on issues. I mean, the Daily Telegraph have been sort of floating this idea of what about a referendum on net zero? And I looked at it a couple of weeks ago and thought, I'm not sure. The poll overnight's remarkable. Quite remarkable.
It is, yeah.
Remarkable that a majority really want to have a proper open public debate about what we're doing in the name of climate change. Do you think there's an argument that we become a little bit more like Switzerland and we have the ability to have referendums on key issues? Now, that would devalue, in some ways, the role of Parliament, but how else getting things changed in this country is very hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, there's clearly an argument for it, and it works very well in Switzerland. Look, I'm a conservative for many reasons, and one of those is that, you know, I like our institutions and the way we do things. I don't want to go down the route of having a referendum on things like this. I think it should just be for really important constitutional issues. I don't think we should go down that route. But the reason why I think the poll is...
You say that, but if we do that, it ain't going to change.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think that the reason why the polling is so keen on a referendum is it's one of the failings of Parliament, because Parliament is not reflecting the views of the public at large. And I've always believed that for a parliamentary democracy to work, everybody in the country's got to feel that at least somebody's speaking up for them. And too often, they don't see that. And so I think that, you know, we've got to do better in Parliament at making sure that everybody feels represented. But I do think things can change on this as well. And look, you know, you're the expert in this. You got the biggest change of all, largely due to your...
By getting millions to rebel.
Yes, and you know, you played the biggest part of all in bringing about that change. There were some of us who were little foot soldiers that had played a little part, but you were, you know this better than anybody. I trust in the great sense of the British public. I think they're always miles ahead of politicians on virtually every issue.
No, I agree.
And on this issue, I think there will be, it hasn't come yet, but there will be a massive backlash. When the real cost of this is discovered and people start to realise what's being expected of them, what freedoms they're having taken away from them, what additional costs are being forced on them, I think there will be a backlash of all backlashes. And to be perfectly honest, I suspect that many MPs and political parties, when that happens, will want to be part of that backlash.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Well, I'm pleased to say that the GB News pub is now open, and joining me is Sir John Redwood, Conservative Member of Parliament for Wokingham, and of course somebody in the past who's been Secretary of State for Wales in the major government, challenger for the leadership of the Conservative Party, Eurosceptic to his fingertips. Sir John Redwood, welcome to Talking Pints. Very good to see you. The thing that amazes me, I look at your CV. You know, you worked at Fleming's, you worked at Rothschild, so you worked at, you know, very successful city institutions. You've got a very acute mind for matters financial. You've been in Parliament since 1987, so you are, I mean, I called you a veteran. I hope that's okay.
Well, I'm still learning the job. Every day I hope to get better, you know, Nigel.
Well, good for you.
And I did go on to run industrial companies, which I found very rewarding and very challenging.
Yeah. So a long career in business, long career in politics. You've held ministerial position. You were head of Mrs. Thatcher's policy unit, going way back to the days when the Conservatives were very concerned, and we will talk about that.
Yeah, I was a young man then, but she still took my advice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, good for you.
You were as good as your last argument with Margaret. That was why she was a pleasure to work for.
Were you scared of her?
No, I wasn't scared of her at all. We had a very good working relationship. It was a different generation. But I worked out very, very early on that she was one of those rare politicians that you could speak truth to power as long as you did it privately and you were loyal round the back, which I always was. We had some really good arguments, and sometimes I persuaded her. It was a very interesting relationship.
Quite a feather in your cap, I would say. But how is it, John, how is it that somebody with all your breadth of experience in finance, in business, in politics, in policy, how is it that we have, frankly, we have had since 2019 some of the most inexperienced in terms of life and lowest grade cabinet ministers this country has ever seen? and you're languishing on the backbenches. How does this work?
Well, I don't think they're low grade, and
they are.
You need people of all ages and experiences, and how do you get experience?
People with no life experience. That's what I'm talking about.
You must ask the bosses that. Ask
Rich daddies.
Ask Mrs. May. Ask Boris. I don't know. I'm ready to serve, but I'm happy to serve in the way I do. It's a great privilege to represent a constituency and to have your voice in Parliament so that you can get hold of ministers and you can argue with them over what they should do next, and that's what I do.
And it's ridiculous that they're not using you, isn't it?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that, Nigel. It's not for me to say. It's not about me. It's about the country, and it's about making use of this enormous trust.
A lot of people sitting...
the country put a lot of trust in Boris and the Conservatives, and I think they were right to choose us, because I think every other party wanted to thwart Brexit and didn't understand the electorate were very serious about this, and certainly didn't understand the opportunities. People actually voted for something different. They voted for change. So I'm one of those voices saying, let's be bold, let's be imaginative, let's be sensible, but an independent country can achieve a lot more.
But I did notice over the weekend, the Labour Party appear to have embraced Brexit because they're advocating scrapping the 5% VAT.
Yes, at last. A tax they weren't allowed to change while they were in it.
That's right.
And the greenest government ever still hasn't taken VAT off insulation and boiler controls and lots of green products. Now, why not? That was one of the things that you and I in the Brexit campaign said, this is a freedom we have. One of the things you want is people to buy more of these things. So why are we taxing them? Answer, because the EU made us. So let's do that, please, Rishi.
No, I get all of that. But how does it feel to be part of a Conservative party that is now clearly tax and spend, that has gone for state controls, maybe not as bad as New Zealand or some other countries, that has gone for this green agenda in a way that really hits some of those on the lowest incomes and some of those running small businesses. John, it doesn't feel very Conservative, does it?
No, I'm delighted when the Chancellor assures us all he's a lower tax Conservative. I say, bring it on, Rishi, bring it on.
It's like Boris calling himself a libertarian. It's not believable, any of it, is it?
And so let's see which taxes we could cut. Because if we cut some of the tax rates, we would actually collect more revenue. Every time a Conservative government has had the courage to cut income tax, the amount of money collected has gone up.
I completely understand that, and I do actively follow what you're pushing out there, and I find it very interesting. But they're not doing it. And my question to you is, this doesn't feel it doesn't feel Conservative.
Well, that's why I live in hope, and I want to make sure more people agree with me, and if people do agree with me, write to your MP. And all my Conservative colleagues, a lot of my Conservative colleagues in private say, John, we like lower taxes. Well, I'm saying you can have them, and it won't be irresponsible to have them. Did you know, for example, I don't read it on any of the normal media, that in the first 6 months of this year to September, the Treasury has collected in £46 billion more in tax revenue than its forecast last March.
I know, phenomenal.
Because we've grown a bit faster than they thought we were going to. So doesn't that tell them something? It should tell the Chancellor that if you get faster growth, the money rolls in. You don't need to put the tax rates up, because that's all before they put up corporation tax and national insurance. My worry is that putting up national insurance, which I voted against, and putting up corporation tax is going to slow the growth, and you might even end up with less money than you would have got if you'd gone for growth. And I'm not satisfied, Nigel. All the time the economy is still smaller than it was just pre-pandemic.
You've become a bit of a serial rebel, really, haven't you? I mean, you're there and you vote on things that you believe to be right. I don't know whether the party whips have given up with you now, but they must be getting...
Well, I don't want to be a serial rebel.
But you are.
And I give them the benefit of the doubt on lots of things.
But you are. But you are.
Because I do believe only the Conservative Party can see us out of this. When I see what Labour and the Liberal Democrats are offering, I think, my goodness, thank goodness.
Well, I'm not sure anyone can tell what the difference would be.
There's quite a bit of difference.
Well, there isn't very much. You know it.
Labour would lock us up a lot more than this government's been doing.
You're being very loyal to your party here. It's perfectly clear you don't think Boris is particularly Conservative, but he was elected for a purpose, and that was to end the agony that the country had been through for that nearly 4-year period, and it was absolutely awful. What was it in your career? I mean, 87 you get into Parliament, just the year before the Single European Act had been signed, and I remember I was working in the city at the time, and I had my qualms about it. I wasn't
Well, I told Margaret Thatcher not to sign it. It was one of the rare occasions when she didn't like my advice, and she was under enormous pressure from the Foreign Office and many of the civil servants. So we had to sign this thing, and they told her it was a free market. I said, no, it's not a free market. It's a legislative grab. It's a power grab. And then I became single market minister later on, and I saw at close quarters just what a power grab it was and how insensitive it was, particularly to small business. It was anti-innovation, it was anti-different ways of doing things. Everything had to be standardised, and it had to be standardised around what a few big corporations told the French and German governments they wanted. You know?
How did you vote in the 75 referendum?
Well, I voted no, of course.
Did you? Okay.
Because I made the mistake of reading the Treaty of Rome.
Oh, gosh.
And I was hearing all these politicians, Labour were in government, of course, Labour and some Conservative politicians, telling me it was a free market. And I said, no, it wasn't just a free market. It was always ever closer union.
Yeah.
And although they hadn't fleshed out all the details, it was quite clear they were going to take us on a massive journey. And I always thought, this is not a journey I, and probably a majority of the British people, want to go on. And it's certainly not a journey we're going to go on if we're lied to about it. And the Labour government in 75 said, oh, no, it's just a free market and we won't lose any sovereignty. Well, of course we lost sovereignty.
Heath said the same thing.
Yeah, well,
Heath said the same thing.
Heath was honest.
Later he was honest.
He's actually said that we were going to lose sovereignty, but Labour in government had the referendum to try and deal with a conflict within their own party, and the main establishment Labour people, who had to take on one or two of their own cabinet ministers, were saying no loss of sovereignty, and I never believed a word of it, because the Treaty of Rome was a journey to sacrifice.
That was the irony, wasn't it?
And that was why I told Margaret not to sign the Single European Act, because it was a sacrifice of vetoes and powers. And I even tried to compromise with her, and I said, given that they say a limited number of laws are necessary for the single market, and we need to have majority voting for those, define which ones they are, and then we get our veto back thereafter. And they wouldn't even do that.
And then when she left, in pretty sad circumstances, pretty thankless circumstances, John Major's first speech, I remember it, first speech, and John Major, who we all thought was a Thatcherite, said we want to be at the heart of Europe. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. My heart's...
I couldn't believe it. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. You know, we were told this was the heir to Thatcher, and but clearly he wasn't. So in the end, it's the mid-1990s, and Major, and you know, there's a civil war going on. It's been going on through Maastricht, but it never goes away.
No.
Never goes away. It's a fault line, isn't it?
Well, a lot of us couldn't take Maastricht because it was a very clear sacrifice of much bigger powers than the Single European Act sacrifice.
Well, that was it for me with the Conservative Party. I was done with it.
I couldn't believe that Conservative leaders or wannabe leaders would think sacrificing the pound was feasible.
I know.
Because I said to them, well, you must rule that out immediately. At least we got an opt-out from this thing. One good thing John Major did, which Labour wouldn't have done, was got an opt-out from the currency. But they wouldn't unequivocally say, we're never going to go into it. And I said, well, how can you still be anything like an independent country if you don't run your own currency?
I mean,
that to me was and then I took the show around the country with others to keep the pound.
No, I remember very well, and it was a good thing that a lot of people united. I mean, saving the pound was our Alamein, in a sense. It was a very important moment.
And I always said that if we'd lost that, I'd have left politics. I saw no point in carrying on if you belonged to a country that didn't control its own money. Couldn't see that, but we won it, so it was a great triumph, so it was worth staying on.
Taking you back a step.
Yeah.
So John Major is, you know, clearly joining ERM's been a catastrophe.
Yeah.
And that was really, I mean, you know, that was...
And there's so few of us ministers against it.
I literally, from that moment on, I've never voted Conservative since. I mean, I may do again one day, you never know, but I've never voted Conservative. And I was a member of the party.
Yeah, sure.
You know, at the time. But in the end, Major says, put up or shut up.
Yeah.
And up pops John Redwood.
Yeah.
And I remember I was at Lord's. I was at Lord's. And I was
you remember Lord's, where you were?
I do. I was at Lord's, looking forward to a proper day out, and I get this message that, you know, Redwood's standing.
Yeah.
And then this sort of slightly unfortunate photograph of your supporters, and I think Tony Marlow had a jacket on for Henley because it was in June or whatever.
Well, they decided to make fun of that, but they were all Conservative MPs.
Yeah,
I had a simple choice. We invited any Conservative MP who wanted to come. I then turned up. I couldn't start my campaign by saying I don't like the look of these people.
it all looked...
That would have been even worse.
I know. It all just looked... and I spoke to Tony Marlow about it.
Well, there's Tony Marlow and Theresa Gorman who attracted quite a lot of attention.
Yeah,
but I was very grateful they at least had the courage to put up. You know?
I mean, they were great people.
They were great. They had guts.
I know. But it was all painted out. It all looked a bit like...
Well, if it hadn't been that, it'd been something else.
But
the major lot were very good at spinning against me.
But then you see, John, I then went through the same thing.
Yep.
That, you know, I was a clown. Yep. UKIP was a circus. That's right. Fruitcakes, loonies, closet races. I've been through it as well. Yeah. When you look back at that period, are you pleased that you stood against him?
Oh, yes. Because I'll tell you why. Because I think it achieved something. And I think it persuaded John Major he had to offer a referendum before sacrificing the pound. Now, I didn't actually think that mattered at all because I knew he was going to lose big time. But it made Blair match him. And I think that was terribly... That's how I would defend what I did. Didn't get me anywhere, but it wasn't really about ambition. It was really about saving the pound. That was what the point of it was.
No.
And I was thrilled that both major parties, including the one who was bound to win the general election, given what Tories were doing, said they were going to have a referendum. And I think that was absolutely critical in the whole thing.
Economics, John. Quickly, are we headed for a period of stagflation? And we've discussed stagflation with the audience over the last few weeks. It doesn't look pretty, does it?
Well, we're certainly heading for a period of slower growth rates after the phenomenal growth rates of recovery, and we're in a temporary period of higher inflation. But I think we need to take actions, and I've been setting out some of those: lower taxes, dealing with supply-side problems, investment in the areas where we need more capacity to avoid stagflation. And I'm terribly keen that we invest a lot more in energy, because this is a country that was always rich in energy and produced all its own electrical power and had plenty of oil and gas and coal which are allowed to
do
nuclear? Well, maybe, but I mean, nuclear takes a long time and is quite expensive. I think we need to get more gas out.
Yes.
And there are various ways of producing more gas. The immediate challenge is why not accept the Shell investment in the Jackdaw field, which would link into the Shearwater platform that's already there. I mean, the kit's already there. The pipes go past the door. Why is it better to import gas in an LNG carrier?
I know, Boris wants to import it. I mean, you couldn't invent some of this stuff.
It's not that I'm being anti-green. We are going to burn the gas anyway. We're not suddenly going to rip out all these gas boilers. So why not burn our own gas? And we've only got half at the moment that comes from ourselves. And on electrical power, I don't really mind how they generate it, but it can't all be wind, because we just saw in September that when the wind doesn't blow, we go from 35% wind to 2% wind, and we got a problem.
You are genuinely excited by Brexit, aren't you?
It's fantastic, but we need to use it, and we haven't used many of the things yet. But, you know, in defence of Boris, he's done Brexit, apart from Northern Ireland, which we've still got to sort out, and he did the vaccines, and that was brilliant. They did something different. I'm not sure the conventional system would have developed the vaccine. So we know we can do it now. So I say take confidence. And if you can do it for vaccines, let's do it for a new energy policy or whatever it is that we now need to do to be a more prosperous country. And if you want to level up, it's about having a great private sector. It's not just about a bit of public investment, though that can help. And it's about getting everybody on those personal journeys. So we need to make the opportunities available. I think it's got to be a much better environment for small businesses and for self-employment, and I think they need to look at the tax and regulations on that. So it's got to be easier for people to work for themselves.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me live from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Your weekend starts here. My show exists to do three things: to inform, to debate and to entertain. Big guests, big stories and big opinions, and I can't do any of it without you. It's lively and it's a little bit funny. So join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To The Point.
Stewart in for Colin Brazier tonight. As Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced a big state high-tax budget, he's facing a backlash from traditional Tories. I'll be speaking to journalist Trevor Kavanagh about what the Tories really stand for. E-cigarettes could be prescribed on the NHS in England to help people stop smoking tobacco products. And to talk about this, I'll be joined by oncologist Professor Carol Sikora. Is it a good idea or just another burden on the taxpayer? A university professor has resigned after being embroiled in a row over transphobia. LGBTQ+ campaigner Peter Tatchell will be speaking to me about that. And the fishing row continues between the UK and France. I'll be discussing all the latest with the Tory MP Andrew Bridgen as tensions escalate between the two nations. So all of that coming up, but first a full news update with Karen Roberts.
Thank you, Alistair. Boris Johnson has said the UK is ready to take appropriate action against France in retaliation to the ongoing dispute over post-Brexit fishing rights. French authorities are yet to release a British scallop vessel that was detained for not having a licence. French prosecutors have summoned the boat's captain to appear in court next August. Earlier, the Environment Secretary told GB News he hasn't ruled out military involvement.
We want to try to resolve this dispute by getting France to understand and accept that those 55 vessels that haven't been granted a licence, probably aren't entitled to one. And if they're able to offer us the evidence that supports the applications, well, we'd process them. But for now, we're trying to de-escalate this. But we're also very clear that if France carries out the threats that they've made, then we will obviously make a proportionate response.
A retired accountant who stabbed her husband 3 times and left him for dead has been jailed for life. Penelope Jackson killed her husband of 24 years at their home in Somerset in February this year. Jackson had denied murder but pleaded guilty to manslaughter, claiming she'd lost control after years of physical and emotional abuse. The Prime Minister has told China's president that world leaders must do more to tackle the climate crisis. The extensive conversation took place as Greta Thunberg joined a rally in London to protest against the use of fossil fuels. During talks with President Xi Jinping, Boris Johnson stressed that all countries must take concrete action to cut emissions and to speed up their transition to renewable energy. The Chinese president has confirmed that he will attend COP26 in Glasgow via video link. President Biden says the US was clumsy over its handling of the Australian, UK and US submarine deal. During his first meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron since the diplomatic crisis, Biden apologised for how the deal was handled. President Macron says the meeting allows the two countries to rebuild trust, with progress made in nuclear energy cooperation and arms export regulation.
What happened was, to use an English phrase, what we did was clumsy. It was not done with a lot of grace. I was under the impression certain things had happened that hadn't happened. But I want to make it clear, France is an extremely valued partner.
The Queen has been advised to rest for at least the next 2 weeks. Her doctors say that she can undertake light desk-based duties but should not make any official visits. Buckingham Palace confirmed that Her Majesty will be unable to attend the Festival of Remembrance on the 13th of November, but hopes to take part in Remembrance Sunday. You're right up to date now. Back to Alistair.
Thanks, Karen. After a budget and spending review in which he raised taxes by the billions and squirted money around as if there was no tomorrow, Chancellor Rishi Sunak said, "We need to make the moral case for a smaller state." Most Tories might have preferred him to say, "We've got to tax fairly and spend wisely." But that was actually Rachel Reeves, his Labour shadow. In her reply to Sunak, she talked about the wealthy sipping cheaper champagne on cheaper flights, many of them bankers enjoying their firm's tax cut too. Also, the broadest shoulders should bear the biggest burden and so on. It was traditional fare, but the fair, tax and wise spending line was inspired. Although she only had 45 minutes to prepare, Starmer was out of it, having tested positive for COVID, she saw an open goal and struck. The Tories were spending big and taxing big. The hint of a little fiscal caution from Labour might not go amiss behind the red wall and perhaps across the country. And perhaps she saw the contradiction in what Sunak had said at the end, as opposed to what he'd done in the action-packed hour-long speech. Labour's poll rating on managing the economy is slowly improving. The Tories is slowly slipping. Now, these days, people tend to judge a political party by what it promises to do with the economy, what it plans to do about wealth creation, distribution, and how much you and I get to keep, and how big and how far the reach of the state should be. Equally, the competence credentials of any political party tend to be measured by their ability to manage the economy. Given that, this budget and spending review begged a key question for me. What do the Conservatives really stand for these days? In 1979, Margaret Thatcher won the first of 3 general elections by pledging a smaller state, less borrowing and lower taxes. Now, in his first budget, her Chancellor Geoffrey Howe raised taxes to cut debt. But after that, the drive was tax cutting and state shrinking. The philosophy on tax was defined by her next Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, who said, "The Tories' belief should be that income or property belongs to the people who earn it or who have legitimately acquired it, and that a case has to be made for taxing it away." Now, in his 2021 budget, Rishi Sunak asked, do we want to live in a country where the response to every question is, what's the government going to do about it? Where every time some new challenge emerges, the answer is always, the taxpayer must pay? Or do we choose to recognise that government has limits? Now, not a million miles apart from Lawson, but the earlier parts of Sunak's budget and the spending review seem to give the thumbs up to the first part of Sunak's fiscal philosophy question. He went for a big state with big government and higher taxes. He also claimed, as I said earlier, we need to make the moral case for a smaller state, and assured nervous backbenchers that evening that every marginal pound in the future needs to go toward lower taxes rather than increased spending. Struck me as a classic case of cake-and-eat-it fiscal policy. Optimism about a better tomorrow, or just plain confusion? You take your pick. Now, the official forecasts suggest that it might just be all right on the night,
and that Sunak might have a small budget surplus by 2024, by which time an election looms. But there are a lot of variables in there. Inflation, employment, interest rates, higher mortgages already inching up, the cost of living generally, so we'll see. My interests focus on what it tells us about the Conservative Party of 2021, led by Boris Johnson, with Chancellor Rishi Sunak seemed by many to be the heir apparent. Sunak's first lieutenant, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Simon Clarke, admitted it was a philosophical shift. The state had an important role to play in delivering its policy priorities, he said. Many commentators said the shift was so great it was a budget that Gordon Brown could have delivered. The ever-balanced and impartial Paul Johnson, director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, said this really is a big-spending, high-taxing government. Claims it was a post-COVID budget, as Sunak had suggested, were blown away by the IFS, who observed 80% of the announced spending had nothing to do with the pandemic. Under the headline, "Thatcherite flame is doused by splashing the cash without cuts," the former boss of the Office of Budget Responsibility, Sir Robert Choate, wrote in The Times, "The man hailed by some as the lone keeper of the Thatcherite flame in a cabinet of deficit-friendly populists has chosen to repair the fiscal damage from the pandemic entirely through tax rises rather than spending cuts." Now, John Redwood, who you just heard talking to Nigel Farage, didn't like what the Chief Secretary said, but clung to the Chancellor's peroration about tax and his reassurance to Tory backbenchers on tax cuts before spending. The economy needs to get back to the kind of policies to bring us faster growth. We get that if we don't hit people's income quite so much. Well, Michael Portillo was less circumspect. He simply said, it's not Conservative. Now, the Conservatives have always had profound disagreements, in recent years often about Europe. But the 1979 election resolved one of the most profound, the management of the economy. Ted Heath's corporist approach, chatting around the Neddy table with managers and trade unionists, were gone. Big spending Keynesianism was out, and the monetarists came to the fore to curb inflation. Subsidies to ailing industries were withdrawn as British Steel and British Leyland learnt to their pain. State-owned enterprises with varying degrees of success were privatised. The 80s took few prisoners and were pretty brutal. But spending seemed to come under some control, and taxes, especially for the highest-earning wealth creators, fell. It became the norm in Tory circles and was still echoed in the days of Cameron and Osborne. This, I think, is something profoundly different. The fact that it took 48 hours to go from "cheers" as a headline to triple whammy tells you something is afoot, and it's more profound than Brown's 10p tax rate or Osborne's pasty tax. So what do the Conservatives of Johnson and Sunak really stand for? And that is my question tonight.